Dum 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 dum. Hey everyone, this is Knitting According to the Nightingale. We are going to be looking at knitting needles in this video. Knitting needles come in all different shapes and sizes, and each shape and size has its purpose, and that is what needs to be thought about when starting a project. Needle size is probably the first thing you will notice. Some are tiny, some are very large, and some people like to use shovel handles. To each their own. What needs to be considered, though, is that the needle size will affect the final product. The larger the needle, the larger the loops in your knitting, which means the faster the knit fabric will be made. However, keep in mind that with all else equal, the knit fabric will be more loose, which means the holes in the fabric will be larger. As one might expect, smaller needles will cause a tighter knit. So choosing the size of the needle will affect how tight the knitting is, and how tight the knitting is will affect how hard it is to knit. So if you're practicing, go for a reasonably loose setup, so you will have an easy ability to knit. If you have chosen the yarn you want to use and are looking to get some knitting needles, most manufacturers provide a recommended needle size, which will have a reasonably loose setup. Most needles will have their size on the end in either US or millimeters, or both. If your needles don't have size on them, and you need the size, then a needle gauge will be a good tool to have. The size of the needle is the smallest hole that the needle fits through. So it doesn't fit through that, but it fits through that. There are also different types of needles that allow for knitting in unique ways that the regular straight needles don't. One such is the double-pointed needles that are most likely going to be used to knit circular items such as socks. This is done by having 3 or more needles arranged in a circle with the yarn on it, and then an additional needle being knitted into the circle, while the needle that was on there is now a free needle. Another irregular knitting needle is the circular needle, which also has the same ability to knit in a circle, but without the need to continually switch out needles like the double-pointed needles. It does have a distinct disadvantage to the double-pointed needles, and that is it has a size that it has to be with some leeway. While double-pointed needles can go as small or as large, given enough needles, as is wanted, circular needles have a limited size. One more thing I personally like about the circular needles is that they tend to be longer than normal straight knitting needles and don't have to knit in a circle. So for a large project like a blanket, a circular needle allows for a much larger needle, and you only need one circular needle to knit. There are many different needles, and depending on what you want to do, there is probably one that is easier to achieve your goal with. This has been Knitting According to the Nightingale.